The notice had been tacked to the board outside the post office in Glenboro for 11 days before she finally took it down. She had walked past it each morning on her way to the laundry where she had worked since October. She had read it the first time without meaning to, the way you read things that are at eye level when you are standing still. Experienced woman wanted for household management, prairie holding, Saskatchewan territory, widower, children grown, respond to general delivery, Halbright. And then a name, not his name, the name of someone who had agreed to hold letters on his behalf. She had memorized it without deciding to. She left it on the board for 11 days. On the 12th, she took it down, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of her coat. She did not tell anyone. Her husband had been gone 2 years. Not dead. Gone. He had walked out in early April when the mud was still coming up through the kitchen floorboards, and he had not come back. And after 8 months of not coming back, he was gone in every way that mattered to her daily life. The boarding house where she rented a room had not asked questions. The women at the laundry had not asked questions. In a small town in Manitoba in 1903, there were certain facts a woman could carry quietly, and most people understood that quietly was how they were meant to be carried. She had written back to Halbright on a Thursday. She had stated her age, 31, her experience, considerable, and her situation, without going into the particular shape of it. She had said she was capable of hard work and that she did not require much explaining to. She had sealed the envelope and walked it to the post herself, and then she had gone back to the laundry and pressed linen for the rest of the afternoon and thought about nothing that was not directly in front of her. His reply came in 12 days. It was brief, 2 sentences and a date. He said the holding was 40 miles from the nearest town of any size, that the winters were long, and that he wanted someone who understood what she was coming to. He said if she still wished to come, the train reached Halbright on Wednesdays. She read it twice. She read it a third time, looking for the thing he was not saying. Because in her experience, a man who wrote 2 sentences when 10 were available was a man keeping something back. She did not find anything specific. She found plainness, and plainness she had decided to trust more than flourish after a certain number of years. She gave notice at the laundry on a Friday. She gave notice at the boarding house on a Sunday. She packed her trunk on a Monday evening, sitting on the floor in her room while the lamp made the walls orange, folding and unfolding the same woolen skirt until she understood she was not deciding what to pack but deciding something else. She packed the skirt. She packed the other things. She set the trunk by the door and went to bed and lay awake, listening to the woman in the next room cough until she stopped coughing, which took a long time. The train left at 7 in the morning. She carried her own trunk to the platform. The land changed after Regina. It flattened out in a way that Manitoba flatness did not prepare you for. In Manitoba, there were still trees in the distance, the suggestion of a tree line somewhere, the idea that the world had edges. Out here, the sky came all the way down to the ground, and there was nothing between you and it but pale grass running in every direction. She sat with her hands in her lap and watched it go by and felt the size of it without deciding what to feel about the size of it. Halbright was smaller than she had expected, and she had expected small. A grain elevator, a water tower, a hotel that looked like it had been built in a hurry and regretted it slightly, a general store, a harness maker, a church with a new addition that hadn't been painted yet. She stepped off the train into a wind she had not prepared for, and stood on the platform with her trunk and her coat pulled shut and looked at the town. He was not there. She stood for 20 minutes on the platform. She counted 4 other people within sight, none of them moving toward her. The station master came out once, looked at her, went back in. A dog crossed the road at the far end of the main street with the particular deliberateness of a dog that has somewhere it needs to be. She picked up her trunk and carried it to the door of the station. The station master looked up from his ledger. She asked him if he knew the man whose name and claim number were in the letter. The station master's face shifted in a way she had learned to read, the small reconfiguration of a person deciding how much to say. He said he knew the name. He said the man had been in 2 weeks ago to collect a length of stovepipe and a bag of seed oats. He said the man's place was 22 miles northeast on the road past the Stoker Creek crossing. She asked if there was a livery. There was. The man who ran it had 3 horses, 2 of which were rented out, and one of which he offered to her with a wagon for an amount she paid without negotiating, because she could see from his face that it was already his lowest number. She loaded her trunk herself. He watched her do it and did not offer to help, which she took as a form of respect. The road north was dry and rutted. On either side, the land ran flat to the horizon and the sky above it was immense and white. There were no trees for the first 8 miles, and then a line of willows along a creek bed, and then nothing again. She kept the horse at a steady walk and did not hurry it. 22 miles was enough time to do whatever she needed to do with her thoughts before she arrived. She did not use the time to rehearse what she would say. She had learned a long time ago that rehearsed conversations did not survive contact with the actual person. She used it to look at the land instead. The way the grass was coming in, the color of the soil where the road cut through a low rise, whether what she was looking at could be made to produce something, or whether it had been worked past its willingness. The holding came into view at 3:15. A house, low and unpainted, with a good solid chimney and a window on the south side that caught the light well. A barn larger than the house, one wall recently repaired with boards that were still pale against the weathered gray of the original. A vegetable garden plot, or what had been one. The beds were there, edged with boards, but the soil in them had crusted over and cracked. Poplar windbreak on the north side, young trees, planted deliberately, which told her something. Someone had been thinking about the future here once, and a sheep pen, which she had not expected. 6 animals moving along the fence in that slow, certain way sheep have. The wool on 2 of them looked wrong, matted along the shoulder in a way that suggested something she could not diagnose at this distance. A man came out of the barn as she pulled into the yard. He was perhaps 45, lean through the shoulders, moving without haste. He stopped in the barn doorway and watched her bring the wagon to a halt. He did not come forward. She climbed down herself and looped the reins over the post. She walked across the yard toward him. He met her halfway. He was not what she had pictured. She had pictured older, more collapsed somehow. He was not collapsed. He was a man who had been through something and was still standing in approximately the same place he had been standing when it happened, which was not the same as being fine, but was not collapse. His face was weathered the way this land weathered things, evenly and without apology. He said he had expected her Wednesday. She said today was Wednesday. He looked at her for a moment and then looked past her at the wagon. He looked at her trunk. He said it was a long drive from Halbright. She said 22 miles. He nodded once. He said he had meant to come in and collect her, but the near you had gone lame in the morning and he had not been able to leave her. He said it matter-of-factly, not as an apology and not as an apology either, just the day's facts. She looked at the sheep pen. She asked which one. He pointed, the gray one, near the trough. She went and looked at the ewe over the fence. The animal was standing with her weight shifted to 3 legs, the left foreleg held slightly forward. She could see from here that the hoof was overgrown on the outer wall. She had seen this before on her cousin's farm outside Portage la Prairie, where she had spent 3 summers as a girl, helping with whatever needed helping. She said she could look at that later if he had a pair of hoof trimmers. He looked at her. Not with surprise exactly, something that was a step behind surprise, the calculation a person makes before surprise settles in. He said he had trimmers in the barn. She nodded and walked back toward the wagon. She took one end of the trunk. He came and took the other. The house was clean in the way that a house is clean when a man has cleaned it because someone is coming. Not the clean of a house that is cleaned regularly. The surfaces had been wiped, but the corners had not. The shelf above the stove held a tin of salt, a small crock of lard, and a dead match that had been there long enough to become part of the arrangement. The table was pine, scrubbed pale in the center. 2 chairs, a stove that was newer than she expected, a gurney model, well made. And she noted that he had spent money on the stove, even when he hadn't spent it on other things, which told her something about his priorities, and she decided they were sound. He set her trunk in the small room off the kitchen. There was a cot, a hook on the wall, a window that looked out at the poplar windbreak. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room and looked at the window. Through the poplars, she could see a strip of sky going pink at the horizon where the sun was starting to go. He stood behind her in the hallway. She did not turn around. She asked if he had winter wheat in the ground. He said he had 40 acres. She asked how it looked. He was quiet for a moment. He said it was coming in patchy, that the east quarter had not taken the same way as the rest, and he wasn't certain why. She said it might be drainage, that the east quarter might be sitting low enough to pond after a heavy rain, even just a little, enough to rot the roots before they established. She said she had seen it do that. He was quiet again, longer this time. Then he said he would show her tomorrow. In the morning she was up before the light. She found the kitchen cold and the stove damped down to almost nothing, which meant he banked it tight and planned to revive it in the morning. She fed it 2 sticks of kindling and worked it back up. She found flour in the bin by the door, half full, and a small crock of sourdough starter on the top shelf that was still alive. Barely. She fed it a spoonful of flour and set it near the warming stove. She found the eggs by going to look for them. He had not been collecting consistently. There were 9 in a nest in the corner of the barn that she spotted before he was up. She counted them and left 7 and took 2 and went back to the kitchen. He came in at 6:30 and stopped in the doorway. She had porridge on the stove and bread dough resting under a cloth, and the 2 eggs fried on a plate, waiting at his end of the table. He sat down. She stood at the stove and ate from her bowl. He looked at the plate and then at the bowl in her hands. He said she could sit. She said she was fine. He ate. She watched the porridge and did not watch him. Though she was aware of him in the particular way you are aware of something you have not yet taken a full measure of. After he went out, she found the household ledger on the shelf behind the woodbox. She did not open it. She set her hand on the cover and felt the thickness of it, which told her at least that things had been recorded. A man who records things is a man who intends to stay accountable to them, and that was more than she had been sure of when she stepped off the train. She put the ledger back. She spent the morning on the sheep, the lame ewe first. She brought her into the barn and worked the hoof over slowly. The animal pressed against her side the way sheep go calm when they feel contained. The outer wall had grown past the quick and turned inward. She trimmed it back in 3 passes, checked the cleft for rot, found the beginning of something, and packed it with what she found in the barn. Pine tar in a tin on the upper shelf, which was exactly what she would have looked for. She worked it in and let the ewe stand and watched her put weight on it. The animal walked. She cleaned the trimmers and hung them back on their nail. The other sheep she looked over one by one, checking the fleece condition, the eyes, the teeth of the 2 oldest ones. She found nothing alarming, but the general condition was a notch below what it should be. They were on hay alone and had been for too long. She had seen this gradual depletion before. Animals that are being maintained but not maintained well. The difference between kept and tended. She found a stand of dried grasses along the south fence that were still standing from last fall, seed heads intact. She pulled an armful and brought them in, and the sheep went for them with a directness that told her everything she needed to know about what they had been missing. When he came in for the noon meal, he found the ewe walking normally in the pen. He stood at the fence for a moment before he came inside. He did not say anything about the ewe. He said the bread smelled good. She put a plate in front of him. Salt pork, bread, a dish of the last of some preserved beans she had found at the back of the cold shelf, still good. He ate. She sat across from him this time. He asked how she had learned sheep. She told him about the summers in Portage la Prairie. She said it briefly. He listened without interrupting, which was a thing she noticed because it was not common. He said his wife had kept the sheep. He said she had died in the 3rd winter. Pneumonia. He said it the way a person says something they have made peace with through repetition rather than time. She did not offer anything back. She let it sit in the room between them and did not try to fill it. He said the east quarter was dry enough to walk after yesterday's sun if she still wanted to see it. She said she did. The wheat came in green and thin, and the east quarter was visibly different even from the road. Paler, more yellow than green, the growth uneven. She walked the edge of it with him, looking at the soil where the plants were sparse. She crouched and pressed her fingers into the ground. It was harder than it should have been for this time of year. But at the low point, where the land dipped slightly toward a line of dead grass that marked an old water channel, the soil was different, darker and tighter. She dug her fingers in and they came out clay-smelling. She stood up and brushed her hands. She said he was right that it was different. She said it was likely a clay seam running through at that depth, holding water up after rain and drowning the roots. She said it was fixable. Not this season, but by fall, if he could get a tile drain in on the low side, the east quarter could come right. She said she had seen land worse than this brought back. He stood beside her, looking at the pale wheat. He did not look at her while she talked. He looked at the ground, the way a man looks at something he has been worrying about long enough that it has started to feel personal. He said he did not have the money for tile this year. She said he didn't need tile this year. She said a cut drainage ditch on the low side, hand-dug, would do enough to make a difference. That it would take 2 or 3 weeks of an hour a day, and he would need to know where to start the cut, but she could show him where to start it. He turned then and looked at her directly, the way he hadn't much until now. She looked back. Between them, the wind moved through the wheat in a long, slow wave. He said he had written the advertisement without knowing exactly what he was writing for. She said she understood. He said he had needed someone to keep the house. He said that was what he had told himself. She said a lot of men told themselves that. He looked back at the wheat. He said the sheep pen needed new corner posts before fall. He said the south gate had been hanging wrong since March. He said the things he had not been able to get to, and she listened and understood that he was not making a list, but making a confession of some kind, accounting for the distance between what the place was and what it could be. She said they had time before the ground froze. He said it would be close. She said close was enough. They walked back along the fence line. He pointed out where the posts were soft, where the wire had lost tension. She noted it, not in a way he would see, just noted it. The general store in Halbrett 8 was run by a woman named Mrs. Fenwick, who had been there long enough that her opinions had calcified into a kind of furniture, permanent and immovable, and you simply arranged yourself around them. She had gone in on the Thursday wagon with a list she had trimmed 3 times before she got there. She set it on the counter. Mrs. Fenwick read it without touching it. She asked whose account. She gave his name and the claim number. Mrs. Fenwick said the account had been quiet since August. She said there was still a balance from the spring. She said all of this without malice and without warmth, simply as information offered from a position of long practice. She looked at the list. She crossed off 2 items with the pencil Mrs. Fenwick offered her. The lamp chimney could wait. The second spool of wire was not urgent, and pushed the list back across the counter. Mrs. Fenwick looked at what remained. She said that she'd heard there was someone at the merch place now. She said it as a statement that was also a question. She said she was managing the household. Through winter, at minimum. Mrs. Fenwick nodded with the expression of someone who had filed this away before it had finished being said. She wrapped the items: sugar, rolled oats, a paper of baking soda, 3 pounds of salt. She set the box on the counter and tied it. She said to tell him the account would need a payment before the end of the month. She said she would tell him. On the wagon back, she thought about the 2 items she had crossed off. She thought about the lamp chimney especially. The one on the kitchen table had a crack at the base that she had noticed on the second night, thin as a hair, but there. It would hold until cold weather. In cold weather, the expansion and contraction would find it. She did not add it to the worry she was carrying. She added it to the list she kept in the part of her mind where things went that needed doing and hadn't been done yet. When she came over the last rise and the homestead appeared below her, smoke coming from the chimney, the barn door standing open, she felt something shift in her chest. Not something large, just a small movement, the kind that happens when something you have been holding yourself apart from begins to feel like it has your name on it. He was at the sheep pen when she pulled in, replacing a corner post with his sleeves pushed up despite the October cold. He had a fresh post set in the ground and was working wire around it with a pair of pliers, his breath coming in short clouds. He looked up when she came through the gate. She set the box on the fence rail. He said Mrs. Fenwick had sent a message about the account. She said she had handled it. He looked at the box. He looked at her. He said, "What did you cross off?" She said the lamp chimney and a spool of wire. He set down the pliers. He said the chimney on the kitchen table had a crack in it. She said she knew. She said it would hold a while yet. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he picked up the pliers and went back to the wire. She took the box into the house and put things away. She stood in the kitchen afterward, with her hands at her sides, and looked at the stove and the shelf and the small, incremental evidence of a household being assembled from almost nothing. And she thought about how that was not so different from other things she had done. She tied her apron and started supper. The cold came in the first week of November with the intention of staying. She had put up what she could in the weeks before. Wild roships from the creek bed, dried into a rough tea that was good for the long months. 3 crocks of preserved cabbage from the last of the garden she had coaxed back into some production. A shelf of dried beans she had sorted and put back into order. The root cellar had potatoes enough. The oats he had brought in from the granary were solid and dry. She had also, without making it a point of discussion, reseeded a small section of the garden bed with late kale that came in before the frost and got cut and stored before the hard freeze. She had filled 2 gaps in the barn wall with sod brick she cut from a wet spot near the creek bed. She had shown him where to make the first cut in the drainage ditch, and he had spent 11 evenings digging it, coming in after dark with mud on his hands and eating without complaint and going to bed and doing it again. He came in one evening in mid-November and washed at the basin and sat down and looked at the table, which was set the same as it had been set every evening, nothing extraordinary about it. And he said, "I don't know how this place looked before you came. I think I had stopped seeing it." She set the pot on the iron rest. She said, "I think you were just tired." He said he supposed he had been. She sat down. He poured coffee for both of them, which he had started doing without deciding to. She had noticed. She had not remarked on it. He said the drainage ditch was done. He said he'd finished the last 4 feet that afternoon before the ground got too hard. She said good. She said by spring it would be enough to make a difference. He said the east quarter would come back. She said she thought it would. He turned the cup in his hands. Outside, the wind moved along the north side of the house. The poplars shifted and resettled. He said the sheep were doing better. She said they had been underworked and underwatered. She said they were good animals. She said the fleece on the 3 youngest ones would be worth something in spring if he kept them on the supplement through winter. He said he hadn't known about the supplement. She said most people didn't. She said she had learned it from a woman in Portage la Prairie who had run 100 head on a quarter section and who had known more about sheep than anyone she had met before or since. He asked about Portage la Prairie. Not intrusively, the way you ask about a place when you are asking about the person who came from it. She told him a little. The summers there, her cousin's family, the way the flood plain looked in spring when the river came up. She told him about her aunt who had taught her to card and spin, and how that knowledge had turned out to be useful in ways her aunt had not specifically predicted. He listened. He did not interrupt. Outside, the wind pressed along the eaves, and the lamp moved slightly, and their shadows moved with it. After a while, she got up and cleared the plates. He stayed at the table. She heard him pour a second cup. She stood at the basin with her back to the room and listened to the ordinary sounds of the house. The stove ticking, the wind, the distant sound of one of the sheep settling in the barn. He said her name. She turned. He was still sitting at the table. He had his hands around the cup, and he was looking at the middle distance, not at her, the way a man looks when he is getting up the nerve for the next sentence. He said he had not thought much about what this arrangement would be. He said he had thought about the work, the practical parts. He said those parts had been answered. She waited. He said there were other parts he had not accounted for. She didn't speak. He looked at her then. He said she had made this place into something he had forgotten it could be. He said it plain, without decoration, the way he always said things. He said he didn't know what to do with that. She looked at him sitting there. The lamp was low. Through the window the sky was absolutely dark, and the stars were beginning, and the poplars on the north side stood still for once. She said she hadn't come expecting much either. He said he knew. She said that had changed. He looked at his cup. He looked at her. He pushed back from the table, not quickly, and crossed the room. He stopped an arm's length from her. The way a man stops when he is not asking a question but is making room for the answer anyway. She put her hand against his chest, just that. Just her palm against the slow, solid fact of him. He put his hand over hers, just held it there. The fire dropped. Neither of them moved to feed it. The cold came in at the edges of the room, the way it did this far north, patiently without drama, and she didn't mind it. She let out a breath that she realized she had been holding for longer than that evening. Winter ran long the way it does in Saskatchewan, past the point where you have made your peace with it, and into the point where you are simply waiting. She waited without difficulty. She had learned patience the hard way, and now it came easily, the way anything comes easily once it has cost you enough. She taught him the supplement for the sheep. He remembered it and applied it without being reminded. She showed him where the kale was stored and how to ration it through the cold months. He found a way to keep the barn 10 degrees warmer with an arrangement of old blankets and straw baling that was not elegant but worked, and she had told him so. In January, she wrote to her cousin in Portage-la-Prairie. She wrote a short letter. She said she was managing a household near Halbright. She said the land was good land that had been let go and was being brought back. She said she thought she would stay. She had not told him she had written it. It was her own news, and she knew it first. He found her in the garden plot in late April, on a day when the ground had finally softened enough to work, breaking the crusted bed with a fork and turning the soil under. He stood at the garden's edge and watched her work, not saying anything. She glanced up. He looked at the plot, which was taking shape in a way the abandoned boards from November had not suggested it could. He said it was looking like something. She said it would be better by summer. He said he'd get the corner stakes in on the east bed if she wanted to extend it. She said she did. He went and got the stakes. Later that week, a woman named Mrs. Dunphy came down the road in a buckboard and stopped at the gate and looked at the homestead and looked at her standing in the yard and said she had heard there was a woman out at the merch place who had an eye for animals and that her mare was having trouble with her near foreleg, and would she be willing to come look. She said she would. She went and looked at the mare and said what she thought, and it turned out to be right. On the way home, she passed the east quarter and stopped the horse. She sat in the wagon and looked at the wheat, which was coming in even this year, a solid green from the road's edge to the far fence line. The drainage ditch ran along the low side, nearly invisible now that the soil had settled over it. You would not know it was there if you didn't know to look. She sat there for a while looking at it. Then she turned the horse and went home. The poplars on the north side had leafed out. The sheep pen had new posts all the way around. The south gate swung clean on its hinge. The garden was staked out and planted, and the first row of carrots was already showing thin green lines in the turned earth. He was in the barn when she came in. She could hear him moving around in there, the unhurried sound of a man who has work and knows where it is. She put the horse up and went into the house and stood in the kitchen and looked at the shelf above the stove, which now held the tin of salt, the sourdough crock, the lamp oil, a jar of dried rose chips, a small bunch of thyme she had hung to dry in January, and a photograph she had taken out of her trunk in February and set there without making a point of it. She had not looked at the photograph in the 2 years since her husband left. She looked at it now the way she looked at a lot of things out here. Steadily, without flinching, as a fact among other facts. She had learned that seeing things clearly was not the same as being hard. It was just the only way she knew to keep standing. She heard him come in the back way and wash at the basin in the lean-to. She lit the lamp, she put the pot on. She heard him dry his hands. She heard him stop in the doorway for a moment before he came into the kitchen. He looked at the table. He looked at her. He sat down. She sat across from him. Outside, the spring light was doing what spring light does in Saskatchewan. Staying longer than you expect it to, holding on past the hour when you have stopped counting on it, until the kitchen goes gold and the world outside the window looks like something you might trust. The soup came up to a simmer. She did not take it off. He poured water for them both. Between them, the table held 2 cups and the lamp and the comfortable wreckage of a working day, and outside the poplars caught the last of the light and held it, the way good shelter does, quietly and without ceremony, for as long as it is needed.